To say that the 90s were a wonderful time for animation would be the most insulting thing that I could ever honestly say. I think we, 90 kids specifically, pretty much know about the amount of amazing things that came on TV every Saturday morning, and how it ultimately shaped cartoons the way that they are now, for better or for worse. This was also the time that Nickelodeon had started airing amazing shows such as Ren and Stimpy, Doug, and SpongeBob SquarePants on their networking platforms almost every Saturday. Sadly though, like with most people my age, the 90s were over, and that meant that most of us who grew up with this stuff had to grow up for the better. As for the animation today, I can't really speak for everyone when I say this, as I know that everybody has their own different form of preferences when it comes to cartoons, but I find that the lack of dark-humored, gross-out episodes of the 90s to be lacking by a lot, even in the Loud House itself, which I've seen before, and it's okay, but I honestly think there could have been more to it. And especially knowing that there are heavy censors by the FCC, as well as personal PR of various networks, ultimately would never allow that kind of thing anymore due to the backlash that they'd get for airing content like that. Honestly, I'm gonna be one of the many people who know for a fact that that was bullshit. And they all know it too. The 90s cartoons and the heavy amount of gross out and controversial episodes were one of the main revolutions of cartoons during that time. Those shows airing were basically our way of telling censorship Nazis and fundamentalists to kiss our asses when it came to their attempts to censor what we all loved. And now, the same thing was happening. Although I'll admit, it's more on the flip side of the same coin, with backing from the other side as well. I think you all know who I'm talking about. It just seems that there will never be a break with people trying to tell us what we can and can't watch on television. I mean, I get it that there has to be some form of regulation, but come on, how in the hell is blood and a couple of fart jokes considered controversial when we all do that kind of thing on a daily basis? If not more, in a more raunchier kind of way. It really sucks the way that things are going now, and I'm hoping that one day that'll all end soon. You know something? It's actually pretty funny when I think about that now, as it seems that one of the main shows on Nickelodeon that fought the censorship Nazis to the core was the show Ren and Stimpy. By far one of my favorite shows growing up as a kid, Ren and Stimpy was pretty much the cultural revolutionary founder in cartoons. It did things that no other company would or could do, and they managed to get away with it for so long. Gross out jokes to the max, controversial storylines, swearing, you heard me right, there was swearing, and sexual innuendos that would make your head spin. Not only that, but the show also tackled some really important issues that were going on at the time. One of those being about, well, gay couples and LGBT relationships between the duo themselves. For anybody wondering, yes, Ren and Stimpy has been confirmed to be a gay couple by the creator himself, John Kay. Well, technically Ren is bisexual, but still, it has been confirmed by him after many years. It did a lot of things right. It did a lot of things right for the time, and when it was canceled, it really hit a lot of people, including myself, hard. I mean, I loved the show and found it to be one of the best shows out there. Well, fast forward a few years later, and I actually wound up finding out that Ren and Stimpy was getting a reboot in the form of an adult cartoon. I actually had some pretty high hopes for this at the time, even making sure of it that I saved enough money to buy the DVD on launch. Unfortunately, what I did wind up watching was rather a disappointing mess of episodes that made me want to vomit uncontrollably in disgust, rather than laughing until I proceeded to vomit uncontrollably afterwards. It was bad. Very, very bad. With the sole exception of Altruist, the other episodes on that disc were nothing else more than abominations that belonged in the center of the Earth's core, rather on television. It actually wound up killing the entire series for me for a good few years after I saw that. I mean, to be completely honest, it's kind of obvious why it was all bad. Gross out jokes in the way that weren't funny, continuous spousal abuse in a lot of ways, and of course, it just didn't seem to have that Ren and Stimpy charm to it. I mean, with the sole exception of Altruist, which I actually do genuinely believe was by far one of my number one favorites and best episode in the adult party cartoon. while the other ones are just, well, bad. Altruist was actually pretty damn good. Of course, that's pretty much what it was for me. And like I said, I pretty much stopped watching the show or having anything to do with it for a good while after that. That is, however, until I wound up winning a contest on a radio show to be a guest star in a podcast that the radio crew were making on their show. I can't really recall the actual show's name itself or what station it was on, but one thing was for sure that I wasn't having any intentions of going there. Not because I felt like I would be gyffed or anything like that, it was just that, well, it just didn't seem that interesting to me in the long run. I mean, that is, however, until I wind up being contacted by the station owner who was running the podcast. He had told me that the whole thing was a rather special invitation and that various cartoonists, creators, and the like were going to be there and being interviewed and things like that, and they really would have loved it for me to come there. It didn't exactly take too much time after that to convince me of the whole thing and make me go. Well, that and the fact that they had already paid for my flight and my tickets and my hotel and things like that. So, I kinda already had to go, given the fact that they already spent that much money for me. Once I had arrived at the place a few days after the trip, it was a rather long one, but definitely worth it, I was taken by an intern to the studio where the show was going to take place. And once I had walked in there, I was instantly met with a few of the hosts that ran the show, and to my sudden shock, John K. himself, or John Krzyzewski himself, was there. Apparently, John K. was one of the cartoonists and creators that were being interviewed that day. Honestly, when I first met him in person, I kind of expected him to be a little bit crazy, especially after the APC run that he did, but he actually was a really cool guy. We actually chatted it up for a good while before the show started up. We basically talked about our lives, what influenced us the most and whatever we did. Hell, we even talked about religion at one point. He was really good at it, too. And once the show had finally started up, it actually went by rather quickly. Basically, it was just, well, kind of a full-on interview with John K. and the others, including myself on a couple of different parts, asking him questions about what he was like, what inspired him to make Ren and Stimpy, and his time on Nickelodeon as well as the adult party cartoon. All in all, it was an interesting and fun kind of show that we did. Once the show was over and done with, I was ready to say my goodbyes and make my way back home. That is until I was told by the host of the show that I actually was pretty good at what I did, and they even offered me to join them again for the next week or so for their next podcast, which I agreed to. Once I had agreed to it, I was left in the room with Mr. K himself while the other guys went out and needed to go get some paperwork done. Now, Mr. K didn't seem to really want to be leaving anytime soon. I just remember looking at him while he sat there with that big smile on his face. And almost immediately when I sat back down in my chair, he started up the conversation with me about whatever it was that we had been talking about last, before the show had started. We wound up talking again for another good few hours or so, and then that's when I mentioned the show Ren and Stimpy. And then I asked him if I could ask him a rather digging question about one of the things that I really wanted to know about him. He of course said yes, and that's when I asked him. You know, Mr. K, I was wondering something. In the show Ren and Stimpy, it seems as though Stimpy really seems to get a lot of crap thrown at him by Ren in nearly every episode. If he wasn't getting beaten up, then he was getting abused in a mental or emotional or even physical way as well. I just want to know if there was ever an episode idea or concept that would have Stimpy finally have enough of Ren's bullshit and finally do something about it. John simply placed a hand on his chin and thought for a moment, before he finally spoke and said, "Well, to answer that question, it's actually a bit of a long story. But hell, we're here and we ain't leaving anytime soon, so might as well tell ya." John said as he took a sip of his water to clear his throat. I actually did, well, to an extent, made that episode with that concept that you just told me about. However, looking back on it, it really didn't seem to satisfy anybody in that matter about what it was originally going to be. I think the episode was called Le Switcheroo, I think. And the concept was based on, well, once the show, and what the concept is based on. Well, once the show had gotten canned back at, I think, 2004 4 or 5 or whatever, the adult party cartoon came out, and was actually supposed to have an episode focusing on that very subject. Unfortunately, that was for the season 2 of the adult party cartoon, and, well, given the failure of the first season, we knew that none of that was going to happen. But even before both those episodes were made, a few colleagues of mine actually wanted me to come up with an episode about that same concept, which was originally going to be called Round and About. Well, we actually started working on the damn thing, but just as the animation process was completed, the episode was swiftly banned and had never aired on Nickelodeon. In fact, Nick themselves even went so far to try and not only fire everybody who was working on the thing to begin with, but also sit there and cover up any kind of, well, evidence of the thing's existence. Never really did get much of an explanation for why they banned it. All I know is that I was just called into the corporate's office one day and swiftly yelled at for the episode that I created. John said. Huh, well, that's certainly something, I told him. Honestly, I would have loved to see something like that. Although I doubt that that'll ever be the case anytime soon. Actually, about that, John said, I do happen to have a physical copy of the thing. I have actually managed to keep it with a couple of other episodes that I've made on a couple of discs that I've been saving for the future. However, I don't really see me making any more episodes of the show anytime soon, so I was just wondering if you wanted to have it. I was actually astonished by the whole thing. I mean, John himself was going to give me an unaired episode, or something similar to that case. Of course I accepted his offer. And with that, John asked for my address and told me that it would be in the mailbox within the week. After that, we both continued to talk for another hour, before he wound up packing up the rest of his things that he had brought with them, and then proceeded to go back to his hotel, to which I followed suit not too long back, as it was a rather long day, and I had to get a couple of things done at the hotel room. Well, the rest of the week went by pretty well. I had gotten to meet a couple of interesting cartoon creators, including Stephen Hillenberg when he was still alive, and I got a bit of a publicity for actually being on the show as well. People even wanted to interview me, which was pretty nice given the fact that I really didn't do much but carpentry. When I had finally came home after that long trip in Michigan, that's where the show took place, I checked my mailbox, and besides a few bills and a couple of packages from Wish that I had ordered, I had found a small vanilla envelope that was autographed in John K. style. After taking everything and sorting through my bills, I opened up the manila folder and found the flash drive, 50 gigabytes, and a handwritten letter by John K. himself, which read as follows. Dear Michael, I honestly wanted to thank you for showing up at the studio when you did. You were honestly a blast. The fact that you weren't one of those crazy fans that went insane every time they saw me was seriously a breath of fresh air in my lungs. But enough crap. This flash drive has the episode on it, and the few other interesting drawings and the like that I had made recently as well. Now I do need to warn you about something that I didn't exactly say back when we were at the studio. You see, this episode was made in a rather dark time of my life. I was going through massive amounts of stress having to deal with Nickelodeon, with various censorship groups, and other things, including angry parents, and of course, because of it, I genuinely felt rather upset and began becoming depressed after work. And I'm not afraid to admit that I was also a bit suicidal as well. This episode somewhat kind of reflects what I was going on through the time. I mean, it's not really overtly graphic or anything, it's a dark episode. A very dark one, but nothing particularly that... who am I shitting? It's dark. I mean, if you're wondering, I'm perfectly fine now. I have been seeing a few therapists over the years, and they've helped me out greatly. With that all said, I enjoyed the episode. I also would give you permission to upload it if you wanted, but knowing how Viacom works, best to just kind of leave it to a couple of screenshots, or try and go on the download the whole thing. Or leak the whole thing, I really don't give much of a fuck. You might even get famous for it. Whatever you choose to do, it's entirely up to you. Thanks again, and I hope we cross paths again soon. Your friend, John K. Well, it was definitely an interesting letter, to say the least. And now that I had a little bit more of an information about what the episode may have contained, I was in for an interesting viewing experience. So once I had gotten the rest of my important crap done for the day, I got myself showered, ate a quick dinner, and made my way back to my bed, with the laptop and flash drive next to it as I cuddled myself into the sheets. Thank God I was a bachelor at the time. I took the flash drive from the side of my bed that I had put it on earlier that day and quickly shoved the USB thing into the driver. Once I had done so, I had gotten the usual message from Windows popping up with whatever something was connected to the computer. What would you like to do? Check files, copy and paste, etc.? I chose to check out the files and was instantly greeted with the folder icon opening up, and the section of the USB drive that contained, well, a lot of files. Most of them were pictures and other various drawings. I would have viewed them, but I was more or less looking for the video that Kerfuski had told me about. About a few scrolls down the list later, I'd wound up finding the clip. Roundandabout.mp4 timestamp 10 minutes. I wasted no time in clicking on the episode, and once I did, I was instantly greeted with the theme song of the show. I simply sat back on my pillow and just enjoyed the familiar tune of my childhood show. Then, once the song ended with the usual Ren and Stimpy logo, it cut to show the main title card of the episode entitled Round and About, with sad violin music playing in the background. The actual title card itself only showed a detailed picture of Stimpy's face with tears in his eyes. The reflection off of his enlarged pupils showed an angry Ren Hoek about to punch the lights out of Stimpy. Once the title card faded, it then faded back to show the house of the duo, with the same cheerful music playing in the background as the bright, smiling sun literally showed down in the joyful-looking front yard. A few fauna and a few other rabbits and things like that slowly made their way across the screen to add to the atmosphere about how wonderful everything was. That is, until the sounds of Ren screaming Stimpy's name shook the entirety of the screen in a comedic manner, while all the wildlife that had gathered in the front yard freaked the fuck out and then proceeded to run off in various ridiculous ways. I think one male deer had hopped into a parked car and drove off rather quickly. The scene then cut to the inside of the house, with Ren angrily making his way into the living room with a pitcher of milk, or carton of milk specifically, in one of his hands. He looked especially pissed off as he continued to walk down to where the couch was at. The scene then quickly panned over to show Stimpy sitting down on his litter box, watching the Muddy Mudskipper show, completely oblivious to the angry Ren making his way towards him. It didn't take long for Ren to finally make his way over towards Stimpy, who was now snapping out of his cartoon daze. "You idiot!" Ren scowled at a now freaked out Stimpy. "Ren, what's wrong? Why are you angry?" Stimpy asked, genuinely confused. Ren then lifted the milk carton up to Stimpy's face, which triggered a much more detailed scene of the milk carton showing the date of the expiration date being May 4th, 2005. Stimpy still seemed rather oblivious to what Ren was trying to convey, so he simply asked, "Well, what's wrong with it?" Stimpy asked. "What's wrong with it? What's wrong with it? It's expired, you dumb feline!" Ren screamed. Stimpy, now taken aback by the sudden loud noise, says, "Ren, it's only a day old. It's not gonna kill you. I'll make sure to go get some milk when I go to the store tomorrow," Stimpy said, still slightly cowering before Ren. Ren, at those words, started to grow unreasonably irate at this point. He then slams the milk down to the ground in a fit of rage and says, "You expect me to drink 1-day-old milk? What kind of monster makes his best friend drink 1-day-old milk, you idiot?" Ren yelled out, and then he proceeded to slap Stimpy across the face, which elicited a spout of joy to come out of Stimpy's mouth. "Okay, you silly chihuahua," Stimpy said, still giggling. "I'll go get you your milk that you want so badly. I just gotta go to get my purse from upstairs in our room," Stimpy said in his happy tone. "Well, hurry it up. My cereal's getting drier by the second," Ren spat, before he stormed back into the kitchen without another word. Stimpy, on the other hand, happily made his way up the stairs, and then took one quick look down them to see if Ren was there. When it was confirmed that he wasn't, Stimpy's happy expression then turned into one of complete and utter hurt, as he began to rub the cheek that had been slapped by Ren. His expression stayed that way as he walked into their bedroom, grabbed the comical-looking purse, and began to make his way outside to go and get the milk from the store. A title card comes up saying 5 minutes in the future, before quickly cutting back to the sound of a car pulling up in the driveway, with Stimpy banging into the door in a comedic manner, now with a happier expression on his face. "Oh, Ren, I've got your milk," Stimpy says in a joyful mood. "Bring it to me, you waste of feline fur," Ren calls out from the kitchen. Stimpy then proceeds to make his way into the kitchen, like the goofball that he is, and then begins to trip when he makes his way over towards Ren. This soon resulted in milk getting splattered all over Ren and in the kitchen in the process. As expected, Ren wasn't too happy about this one bit. "Ah! You waste of protoplasm! First you give me expired milk, and then you take 5 minutes to get home, and then you act like a clumsy fool and trip, spilling the milk in the process!" Ren yelled as he shook himself to get the rest of the milk off his body. "To make it all worse, I'm now late for work! Honestly, Stimpy, you're good for nothing! Now clean this mess up before I get back to work, and don't forget to do the chores down on the fridge, you idiot!" Ren said as he stormed off towards the front door in the living room. But Ren, it was a..." Stimpy began before the door slammed shut. "Accident," Stimpy said as his ears drooped, the same saddened expression from earlier plastered on his face once more. Stimpy simply made his way into the kitchen and then began to clean up the mess that he had accidentally caused. The scene then cut to a rather depressing montage of Stimpy doing the various chores that were instructed in him on the list, mopping the floors, vacuuming, dusting, and one scene of Stimpy sitting in the closet crying to himself as he organized the various shoes that were comedically scattered all over the place and seemed to last for at least a good mile. Once completed, the scene then transitions over to the house again, but this time at night before cutting back into the house with Stimpy on the middle of the living room floor, tired and completely out of breath. Then, just like clockwork, Ren burst through the front door saying, "Stimpy, I'm home!" Stimpy immediately gets up and puts on a smile as he runs off screen for a second and grabs a pair of pink slippers. He then runs up to Ren and says in his happy upbeat tone, "Good evening, Ren. I brought you your slippers," Stimpy said as he bent down to put them onto Ren's feet. Yeah, whatever. I'm starving. Where's my dinner?" Ren asked. Stimpy's face then shot up next to the screen as a sound of broken glass played in the background. From what I can interpret in this scene, Stimpy had been so overworked with all the chores that Ren had given him that he likely had forgotten to cook dinner. Yeah, Ren. Just give me a minute. It should be done soon," Stimpy said as he ran quickly into the kitchen. Ren simply groaned and set his lazy self under the couch and began watching TV. The scene then cut to show Stimpy looking frantically all around the place and the refrigerator for any kind of leftovers to heat up for Ren's dinner, but finds nothing but various ingredients for other meals that would still have to be prepared. Now panicking at this point, and not wanting Ren to get any more angrier than he was already, Stimpy yanked open the freezer and pulled out 2 giant TV dinners, and then proceeded to throw them in the oven in a breakneck speed before slowly sliding down the oven with a huff when he turned it on. The scene then transitions over to show Ren sitting down at the dinner table with a fork and knife in hand as he waits. His eyes are closed as he's waiting for his dinner. Stimpy then comes into frame and places a metal tray down next to Ren, who simply opens his eyes and then glares at the meal in front of him. "Stimpy?" Ren says flatly, his eyes not leaving the side of the dinner. "What the heck is this?" Stimpy sits down on his chair and begins to open up his own meal before answering, "Well, Ren, that's a TV dinner. I bought them when I was at the store so that way we could have something quick to eat," Stimpy answered. Ren then lifted his gaze up to meet at Stimpy, the flat expression not leaving his face. "Stimpy, out of all the things you decide to serve me today, you chose a crappy TV dinner?" Ren growled. Stimpy stopped eating at that point, and his now fearful face began to return. "Well, Ren, it was late, and Stimpy stuttered. Ren's face now grew into an angry expression as he slammed the dinner off the table and down onto the ground like he had done with the milk earlier in the episode. "You had one job, Stimpy," Ren began. "All I ask for when I get home each day is a nice meal ready for me to eat when I get home. But instead, you just got lazy again and served me this hunk of garbage on a plate," Ren screamed. Stimpy immediately exited his chair, as did Ren, who slowly began to make his way over towards the cowering feline. But Ren, I couldn't make anything. You gave me all those chores to do, and I just didn't have the time," Stimpy said as he and Ren made their way into the living room. "Oh, of course it's my fault now, isn't it?" Ren sneered. "After everything I've done for you. I work every single day to keep this house up and food on the table for you, and instead of acting like a good friend should, you decide to get lazy again, didn't you?" Ren had already backed Stimpy up against one of the walls near the front door. Stimpy was now cowering even more and shaking profusely as Ren continued to belittle him. "First you give me expired milk, then you take too long to get it home, then you spray me with it, and then after a long day of working to help get you a home and food and everything you want, you turn into this selfish feline and don't even cook me a good dinner?" Ren snapped at Stimpy. Then without another word, Ren began to hit Stimpy. Wasn't exactly comical or completely over the top with the violence either. It looked, well, accurate to how somebody would actually hit somebody. And the reactions afterwards were also accurate. Stimpy only continued to cower as Ren landed blow after blow into Stimpy's body. Bruises and small cuts started to form on the red cat's fur while Ren yelled out, "You think I like hitting you, huh? You think I like getting angry like this? No, I don't. It's your fault that you made me angry today. And now you're gonna sleep in the shed outside, now for being a horrible person," Ren screeched. Stimpy soon moved his hand to find a large flower vase that was perched up on a small table nearest the door, and with one swoop, he smashed the vase over Ren's head, shattering the vase into pieces while Ren fell to the ground, groaning in pain. Stimpy only stood there, breathing heavily, and with a bit of shock at what he had just done. Ren soon got up from the floor and turned to Stimpy with an evil death glare on him. "Why did you do that, Stimpy?" Ren snarled. Stimpy at this point gave an angry look on his face and then growled. "You know why I did it, Ren," Stimpy began. "I'm done having to deal with you anymore. You've hit me, you've abused me, and you made me your slave," Stimpy spat. Ren just continued to look at Stimpy with the same death glare, not leaving his face as he continued to look at his friend. "You're not gonna hurt me anymore. You've done this all my life, all the time that we were friends, if I can even call you that anymore. You want your dinner, you spoiled brat? Then go make it yourself. I'm leaving and I'm never coming back," Stimpy said before making his way towards the stairs. However, before Stimpy could make even his way up the first step, he was quickly grabbed around the neck by Ren's arms. He gagged, and he was pulled down to the ground and slammed hard on the floor. "You think you can leave me?" Ren jeered as he tightened his grip around Stimpy's neck. "Well, guess what? I'm not letting you." "Ren, please, I can't breathe," Stimpy said as he tried to get Ren's arms off of his neck. Ren simply began to move around, moving Stimpy's neck into rather different and uncomfortable positions, causing Stimpy to gag and continue to beg for Ren to let him go. "You think that I'm going to let you go after that little stunt? Well, guess what? I'm done. I'm gonna make sure of it that you never leave me. I swear, I hate you so much," Ren screamed as he yanked on Stimpy's neck hard. "Ren, please stop." The sound of a sudden pop caused the entire scene to grow quiet. The camera cut to Stimpy's face, who had a slight look of shock on it, before he let out a long breath, his eyes closing and his body completely going limp. Ren, whose rage had now completely dissipated when the sound came, loosened his grip on Stimpy's neck a bit and began saying in a calmer manner, Uh, Stimpy, are, are you okay? Ren asked as he loosened his grip even more. Upon full release, Stimpy's body fell to the ground with a soft plop, not moving at all. Ren, now slightly worried, made his way over towards Stimpy and began to shake him a little. Hey, man, I didn't mean to pull you that hard. Come on, get up. You don't have to worry about dinner tonight. I'll make it. Stimpy still didn't move, and worry and panic on Rand's face only grew more and more as he continued to shake Stimpy, calling his name over and over again in a desperate attempt to wake his friend up. However, nothing happened. Ren rolled Stimpy over onto his back and then checked his heartbeat. There was nothing. Ren then looked at Stimpy's neck and saw that it looked a bit bent, in a way, and looked a little bit longer than what it was originally. That's when he made the horrifying realization that in the fight, he had pulled too hard on Stimpy's neck, and in turn, snapped it in the process. He was already dead before he even shut his eyes. Ren simply fell to the ground next to his friend and began sobbing profusely, uttering a litany of apologies of his now long gone friend. I'm so sorry, Stimpy. Please wake up, Ren said in between sobs. The last scene then faded in for about 3 seconds to show another scene. The last one, Ren was standing next to a freshly dug grave in their backyard, with a small wooden cross marking the place. Ren was standing right next to it, not moving, as the pitter-patter of rain poured itself onto the grave and Ren himself. The scene then panned over to Ren's now bloodshot eyes, and deep and utterly regretful face. He began to sob again, and with his last words, the episode said, I'm so sorry, Stimpy. And with that, the episode ended, and I was brought back to the media player that had played the episode for me. I wound up trying to contemplate what the fuck that I just saw on that thing. I mean, it wasn't a bad episode by no means, but it certainly wasn't something that I was expecting either. Actually, scratch that. I was kind of expecting something to be a lot like this, with a lot of violence or whatever, but I was not expecting Stimpy to die at the end of it. Then again, though, thinking back on it, Mr. K did say that he had been feeling like shit when he made this episode, so I guess it might have just been a plot or something. I don't even know. One thing I do know was that I fell asleep sometime after viewing the episode, and the next day I wound up waking up to a rather unfortunate sight. The USB drive that I had gotten from John K, I apparently had rolled over it a few times while it was still on my computer, and because of the force of my weight that I exerted onto it, it wound up snapping. Actually, no, it broke into pieces. Specifically, the metal part had separated from the rest of the driver, which shattered on impact. It didn't work again, no matter what I tried doing, no matter what I tried going at. So not only was I a complete dumbass for not sitting there and removing the damn drive from the computer and putting it somewhere safe, but I'd also lost the footage. And I doubt that John would give me a new one if I asked him. So completely bummed out, I just simply did what I usually did that day, and never really bothered with the drive at all. In fact, I wound up taking it and throwing it in the garbage, seeing as how it was completely useless. My final word on this whole thing would be that, while it was certainly an interesting episode in of its own self, I could kind of see why Nickelodeon would have wanted to ban the thing for what it was, especially knowing that the death of one of the characters would have been the end of the show for good.
In fear and surprise, as your eyes widen, your mouth goes dry with each battered breath. You try to scream, your mind begs to thee, glued to your computer screen. The killers they slash, the tapes burn and crash. The cartridge you bought will be your final haunt. The rituals of hate will seal your fate. The tears you shed will be from the fear-gripping, horror-driven, nightmarish, gore-filled, terrorizing, hateful, burning, violent, rage-inducing, knife-slashing, blood-splattering, silent screams. Only time will tell if you will escape this online hell. Your horror-filled obsessions will come with its own regressions. Your pathetic screams will not be heeded in any way, because your nightmares will come at any day.